Hey, well, welcome to NBP's frequency separation tools. Now, frequency separation right out of the gate, guys, is nothing new, and there are plenty of free actions available all over the internet from all kinds of artists and providers and sources to do basic frequency separation. I myself, with NBP, we've had a proprietary plugin in the past that does it and does different choices and options. But what we're doing here is a cost-effective and diverse way of not only giving you lots of frequency separation options, but also some instruction on how I recommend using the different things depending on what you're trying to do. This collection is great if you don't have frequency separation actions, or if you want a nice, clean, simple one just to get it working, but you also have choices, and that's what this is about. So let's dive right in. Let's talk about what we are doing. Now, frequency separation, of course, if you're not familiar with it at all, I'd recommend watching some videos so you can see how it works and what it's about. But I'm going to talk you through a few different options and why you may or may not want them. So let's check this out. First and foremost, if you look at the collection here of the NBP frequency separation tools, we have the first gray ones, this collection here. These are all the median filter ones. The blue ones are surface blur, and the yellow ones are Gaussian blur, which I'll talk about in a minute, why you may not want to use Gaussian, but why I also included it. Also, we have a couple of different choices, little things that augment the process, or at least different functions of it, as well as two pretty specific different ones that I'll talk about in a minute. A lot of these have a lot of crossover, and most of them, of course, are going to get you the same result slightly differently. The point is to show you how to use frequency separation in different situations, often multiple times in an edit. Yeah, multiple times in an edit. So let's walk you through a few things. First of all, these gray ones called median utilize median for the blurring operator. Okay, it's under noise and median. You may have seen this many times. Earth Oliver has videos using median. A lot of people have started to use median over the years as the blurring operator or the filter to do the separation process. It is preferred by many people. That is why it's my first option. I use it quite frequently. The next ones, the blue ones, are surface blur, another blurring operator that's very similar to median, but slightly different. And again, we're splitting hairs there, and there's a lot of crossover, but a lot of people do like surface blur. Before we talk about Gaussian, let's go into these. So the first one, we hit NBP FS median, and immediately it's going to do the process. Now, keep in mind that you're supposed to set the radius of whatever blurring operator you're using. There's been all kinds of different advice on the internet. Some people say, make it as small as possible until you see texture just barely disappear. And that is a great sort of catch-all solution to getting frequency separation set up. Right until you see finite texture disappear, move the radius up. So if move it all down to 1, the texture is basically there, 2 and 3 and 4, and you have to just kind of eyeball it, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with any of that, of course. I'm going to put it at about a 6, and I'm going to hit OK, and of course the process is run. Now, I'm going to show you more about this one specifically because the others are the same. They just use a different blurring operator, at least the very first option. So as you can see here, we have the high texture layer, okay, which is just simply the apply image extraction process, set to, different blending mode once it's done. And the low layer, this is in fact the blur that we just did, as you can see. There it is. All right. We have a transitions layer where you can paint in between texture and color. That's pretty common. And then, of course, we have the healing layer, which is simply the high layer duplicated, right? Changed to normal blending mode and clipped down, allowing us to do, as long as you're, let's say my spot healing tool, I turn it off, sample all layers in the option up top. And then I can come in here on that layer and do some healing on basic things that I want to heal on the high layer, little details of texture if I want to sample them. Excuse me, if I want to heal them. And of course, a regular healing tool can be used as well under a current layer option up top. You can do sampling and whatnot on the high layer. Now that's all wonderful, and that's pretty common. If you're familiar with frequency separation, you've seen this, right? So if I were to delete it and then run NBP FS surface blur one, you'll get the choice of the radius again. I'm just going to hit enter on the default, and it sets it up the exact same way, but now it's using surface blur. This is all pretty straightforward frequency separation stuff, and that's great. Nothing wrong with any of that. But before we go into different options, let me talk about why you might want to change something. For example, in other words, a radius setting. So let's go back to median. Now, the suggestion of change the radius, use it as small as possible and change it until the detail just barely goes away. Let's go to like a 3. That's kind of true. So here it is. I've lost a fine texture in her cheeks, right? But if you look, of course, there's still a line up here and other lines. Let's say I wanted to get rid of those. I'm going to go ahead and put it on 2. No, I'm going to put it on 3. There you go. I'm going to hit OK and run that. Now, if I go to my healing, add radius of 3, and if I come up here to my spot healing and I want to get rid of this crease for some reason, I won't be able to. And that's because I did not use the blurring operator, the smoothing operator, the filter, strong enough. If you look at the low layer, the blur is still there, right? So you can't do, significant healing with that. You can do lots of other things with a small radius, and it makes sense to use a small radius for certain things. For me, small radius makes its appearance on textures that are not always skin. They make their appearance on fabric a lot, small radius for me. It just depends on what I'm trying to do. Let me give you a counter example. Let's say I go back to median, and this time, as you can see, that area that I was trying to heal for whatever reason is now blurred with a 14 radius. Sometimes that's all we need to do a specific process. Is for some reason we wanted to get rid of this line. Okay, now we have a significantly better chance. Now, I'm not saying we should get rid of this line at all because this is just part of the anatomy. But as you can see, by knowing what was our goal was to heal. Okay, well, we need to set the radius based on what healing we're trying to do. Is our goal to paint color beneath texture in a smooth way? That might be another radius that we use. And then there's an operator that we use. So let's say you go to surface blur. And you see how it blurs out. Even at 12, we still have that line. So if we wanted to heal lines like that on our shot, surface blur may not be our best choice because we can play with threshold and we can make other things happen. There's a threshold of 30. It's starting to get super soft. Radius of 22. And we still have this line based on the way the algorithms work on surface blur. So for healing that line, if we wanted to do it in a smart way with frequency separation, surface blur isn't our tool. And that is why median exists. And that's why we have other options for our blurring operators, right? So that's just one thing that you can consider. Let me delete all these extra layers that we don't need. That's just one thing that we can consider when we're working with frequency separation is what are we trying to accomplish and what tool is the best way? Now, let's go back up. On median, we also have median double. This again is pretty common. A lot of people like to set up the low blur layer as a smart object or a smart filter, and then you can apply the same exact blur twice to it. Median running twice just kind of gives an extra smooth result while still preserving texture, or rather preserving outlines and hard frequency separation, high frequency areas, excuse me, right? It's just a minor thing. So if you were to, let's go to the transitions area here, you were to paint in between now, we'd be preserving a lot. I'm going to overpaint it just to do it intentionally. As you can see, now we're really doing a smooth area there. And it's just, again, it's not right, but it shows you the texture preservation. And that's just one option in case you want the option of doubling up your healing, right? Also, depending on micro details of what you're trying to accomplish, sometimes when you double up, I've succeeded before with using like a 3 at first or something like that, and then a 12 after that. Just look at the result that you're getting and determine if that's something that's working for you. Now, if you're just setting frequency separation up just to clean up skin a little, and you're new to it, this might all seem like you're really wasting a lot of extra time. As you can see, we're just cleaning that up, and that's cool. But what you must remember is as you get more advanced in your retouching in general, you'll look at a situation of hair, texture of skin, eyelashes, which is more different kind of hair in terms of how it shows up on the shot and what's behind it, fabric, concrete, clouds, anything. You're going to start seeing things not as skin, not as hair, not as fabric. You're going to see it as frequencies, high frequency, low frequencies, high contrast, low contrast. And you're going to be able to go, oh, I want to manipulate it in some manner. So what do I do? Well, retouchers for years, especially commercial retouchers, have used frequency separation lots of different ways. They leverage it in different ways. They set it up in different ways. And that's what this is. This has way more overkill than you could ever use all of them, but you'll have the options there. Let's continue. Now, this other one, median subject, it just leverages Photoshop's subject selection power. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit. Okay. So we're going to choose our radius like normal. So let's say I'm going to choose like, I don't know, 12 will work, whatever. Hit OK. And when it's done, it sets up frequency separation, but the entire thing, if you look at the folder of the frequency separation process, the entire folder has been masked out of subject. Now, in this shot, it's not hugely useful, but let's say her arm. Let's say I go down to the transitions here, and I want to paint on her arm. Now, when I paint this shadow right here, and I blend and I resample color to paint to keep the texture, but paint skin tone, you know what? She's already masked out. Her arm is masked out. And if you have a full body shot or something like that, if it's a nude or a bikini or swimwear or something like that, you can have the skin basically pre-masked. It works really, really well. If I hold down Shift and click the folder with the mask on it, you can see the haloing that happened from my painting. I'll turn it off and on, off and on. You see that? So it's just like, okay, I do want to do a lot of frequency separation across lots of parts of the body. I need the body masked out quickly. There you go. That's what it's for. See, minor variation, but you know, it just helps for it, what you're pre-envisioning, right? If you're like, I need frequency separation in general, I'm going to do lots of different little things. I don't know what they are, but I'm looking at different areas I want to fix. Okay, run a general one. But if you know you want the subject, again, especially for nude work and lingerie and glamour and things like that, where there's a lot of skin, a lot of physique, a quick mask of that helps a lot when you're trying to do some heavy frequency separation to clean up a lot or to give that real ultra polished look, right? Simple. Now we have another one called variable. This one's more experimental, and I recommend that you experiment with it. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So when you go to variable, median in this case, the first thing it's asking you is on the first, you know, like for example, this, if you look over here on the action process, that's in the middle of the process right now, it says low highlights and low shadows. Okay, so you can flip and flop them, of course, but on the highlights, let's put a high rate, really high, 20. Now on the shadows, let's put something really low, 2. I'm exaggerating really to show you guys on video. All right, so 2. Now what happened? So what it does, it has set up the low layer to blur with a large radius of 20 on the highlights using blend diff. It scales back that and blends it all the way down to a radius of 2 on the shadows. And then it does the separation process. What does that mean? Well, we can envision what it means by tapping, let's say let's select some mid-range color. On our transitions, we're going to fill the whole layer. It's going to be very difficult to see, but you notice the highlights have a lot of texture. You see all this texture in here? And as you go into the shadows, the texture is a lot less. See that? Deep in the shadows of her lips, the texture is a lot less. Highlights preserve more shadows. So if you're thinking to yourself, I want to do some pretty heavy frequency separation, and I want to make sure my highlights don't get, you know, smoothed over and look blurry and strange. There's a lot of ways to do that, but this is one. You can set this up with a higher radius, and you should experiment to what your shot needs and to get used to it. A higher radius in the highlights and a lower radius on the shadows, making that you have less texture preserved in the shadows and more texture preserved in the highlights. Now for grins, I'm going to go ahead and do some painting, quote unquote real, as if I was going to do that for real. So let's come in here. We'll do even some masking as I'm painting color using a nice soft brush, 4% flow, etc., etc. My video tutorials collection talks about my frequency separation sort of philosophy, if you want to check that out. But I know that as I'm painting, even color into highlights, I'm preserving a lot of texture in there. It's gonna be a little harder for me while I'm working to obliterate the texture of the highlights, which one of the sort of, you know, aftershocks, if you will, of a bad frequency separation process is in fact the highlights getting too muddled up and start losing detail. Now I've overpainted this intentionally to show you, but there it is off and on. As you can see, we have a lot less texture preserved in the shadows, though some, and then a lot more texture preserved in the highlights. Again, play with these numbers. I chose 20 and 2 just to be extreme, but play with these numbers. Maybe this variation, that's why it's called variable, maybe this variation on frequency separation is exactly what you need. Maybe you've been searching for this based on the methods that you like to use to get that perfect glamour skin or whatever it is that you might be doing. Hold up a second. Let's just go ahead and delete this now. There we go. Now keep in mind too, I've gone through double, which exists on median. I don't really have it on the other two. I don't find it as useful. I feel like I'm misleading you if you do surface blur or Gaussian blur twice. There's no benefit there. There really isn't, so I didn't include it. And then we have subject and variable, which I skipped over Sharpen for a reason. I'll get back to that in a minute. But we also have that on surface blur. We have subject and variable. Okay, we do. But let's move on to median skin tone. Similar to subject, this one is you decide your radius. Excuse me, the first thing you have to do, I forgot it's backwards, is determine the skin tone range. So it's using a process that I use for a lot of my actions to select skin tone. You can turn detect faces on and off and see if you get a better result. You can slide the fuzziness slider until you roughly have the skin. When you use this function on any of my actions, don't panic about hair. Don't panic about you know, her hoodie, etc., etc. Especially in this process, nothing automated is happening. You're just setting it up. You can simply avoid the hair when you're working. But this is just to get a basic idea. Hit OK. When using it for frequency separation, more is usually better. So get a little more liberal with your skin selection. And then again, a radius. To pick your radius, I'm going to go ahead and use 12. Now, the difference here, it's all set up like normal, except the mask on top is not the subject. It's in fact the skin. This is just another way of giving you some options. So while you're painting skin tone, let's say you come in here and you're painting skin tone in between the layers, or you decide to do healing on the top one or whatever, you are masking out everything that isn't skin tone, right? So, and subject, by the way. So if I were to paint her arm and paint over here, nothing happens. But as soon as I get on top of her arm, then I actually can affect that area, right? So it's just a minor detail, but here again, very, very useful when you want to do some, you know, kind of, how do I put this? More universal frequency separation across an entire figure, entire body, but you want to have some level of control. It's also a great way to do a quasi-automated version of frequency separation, which is great for that kind of social media glamour look. So you can take your low layer, duplicate it, and then you can come in here and go to blur and choose a very high surface blur, something like a 40 and a 20 or something like that. There we go. Now, as you can see, we went from this to that. And what it does is it kind of does a very overly polished blur, but because it's only being affected to the skin, now you've done, like I said, a quasi-automated version. We have automatic actions that are a little smarter than this, but this is just another option you can do with this version of frequency separation, whether you do the work manual, whether you do it semi-automated, or whether you do a combination of the two. That is what it's there for, is to give you choices, right? Now, we also have NBP frequency separation median luminosity ranges. That's a mouthful, and the next one's even more so. So if we run that, we again choose our radius. Now, the difference here, this has been seen before in some of the tools that I've created. Now we have the layers in between high and low, which are painting layers, very common. We have the highlights masked out, we have the midtones masked out, and we have the shadows masked out. Here again, to give you choices. If I were to fill the entire frame, you'll see I filled it without one skin tone. As you can see, the only midtones there. And if I fill it here, you can see it's only shadows. Just gives you an idea that that's what's available. So again, if you're having trouble with your highlights getting muddled up while you're painting, you can just come in here. Let's say you want to do some frequency separation painting. And while you're painting, you'll notice it'll stop letting you when you start getting to a certain range. It'll protect the highlights. Okay. And that's kind of important while you're working. It's not like you should just get sloppy with it, but some people have found that these little preset luminosity ranges, kind of filter things out, mask things out, helps them when they're trying to get a significant result quickly without worrying, oh, am I overcooking it? Yeah, opacity is powerful. Masking in general is powerful, but these preset luminosity masks have been very useful to a lot of people. All the usual things apply. The healing layer clip down, it applies. You can modify the low layer if you want, etc. You can create a mask on the folder as well, which we're about to do with NBP frequency separation median luminosity ranges subject. So again, we choose our radius, hit OK. It sets everything up, uses Photoshop's brain AI to do a mask of the subject. Now you might think, why isn't the mask every single time? Well, over years of use, especially since Photoshop's subject mask selection has been so powerful, I've noticed that there are times when I want it and times when I don't. So that's why we have two variations on it. Now keep in mind too that we have that in surface blur and we have that in Gaussian, etc., which we're about to talk about those. I don't need to necessarily show you all the surface blur ones, but they're there if you like using that, and they're there if you feel like you want to experiment. Let's say you're a median user and you want to try some other things. Well, the same functions exist in surface blur. Now, Gaussian. Why are these here even at all? Here's the deal. Over the years, Gaussian was what most people learned. Going back a few years, most people learn frequency separation with Gaussian. That's usually the first time that people, figure out this. They found an action or a tutorial or something like that. And that's specifically where they say, hey, you need to just dial it up until texture disappears, and then you can go from there, right? Why in the world, if it's been, superseded by surface blur, and then that's been superseded by median, even though I interchange those back and forth, why would I include Gaussian? Because if for some reason you chose 20 you have all kinds of blurring and haloing. That's just a mess. You can prove this by filling the layer. You see all the haloing. It's not particularly useful, but here again, keep in mind, there's no one catch-all. You could argue that median is your catch-all. You set that up, reasonable radius, and get to work. That people like it for a reason. The Gaussian has its purpose too sometimes. Let's say I do want to have a really smooth result, super smooth, and I don't worry about I need it for one specific area. Okay, keep in mind when using any type of radii for frequency separation, blurring operators, smoothing operators, the lower radius you use, the more potential you can obliterate texture. The higher radius you use, the more you're going to protect texture. Let's prove that. So we do like a 1, and now that we have it set to 1 and we fill, whoa, on the video you guys probably can't even see this, but you'll see that her cheek texture, which has the most texture of the shot, is very micro detailed, very small. Only the smallest micro texture has been preserved by using a radius of 1. And also when you use radius of 1 on Gaussian, your haloing is controlled because it's only a radius of 1. But let's say you need to do some kind of work where, I don't know, you need to, this kind of texture right here, this meshy texture, you want to preserve a lot of it, but paint underneath it, possibly. So you look at it and go, you know what, I'm going to try Gaussian. And then you come in here and you use a pretty fat radius, something that really blurs out a lot to destroy texture. Okay, then you hit OK. And now you come in here and you choose like a skin tone color and you paint. And you look at it and go, well, you know, that's not bad. We're painting, and let's say I use a darker color. We're painting, and it's letting me smooth out. Some of this is very, very subtle to see on the video, guys. It's letting me smooth out a lot of this, taking color from other sources. But it's keeping a lot of that texture, a whole lot of that dark texture in there. In fact, I'm even creating a sort of a toning over it. That's not something that would be as easy to do with surface blur, because surface blur would keep all of this. It would keep all those, perimeters and high frequency areas, and probably cause you to have a weird effect if you painted heavily on it. Okay, that's just one option. What about the actual face? If you look at her face and think, you know what, I want to preserve a lot of texture, but I want to do some pretty heavy stuff. So I'm going to put it on 12. There you go. My perimeters are messed up. They're haloing like crazy. We know this. Okay, but now we have such a strong texture preserved that I can get really creative with this and paint heavily, knowing that a lot of texture is preserved. If I look at one spot, great for fixing one spot. Maybe under the eye, I want to add some color, but I really want to preserve all of that anatomy. And maybe Gaussian blur is going to be the best solution for you because it's going to preserve a ton of texture, but still allow you to paint underneath it. See? Now, on the video, it's very hard to see the differences. One of the reasons this collection exists is so you can play with the different options that you may have seen a video about or read about. And we have variations on them, of course, like we just showed you. But don't discount Gaussian yet. Sometimes that extra blurring could be good when you don't have to worry about perimeters, right? It's not a catch-all. It's really not a great catch-all. It's a great way to obliterate texture really, really badly. So in case you need that look, or you need it for concrete or something else, or a really fine mesh, but it's also a great way when you need to preserve a lot of texture but still be able to paint underneath for specific fixes. Okay, you have to check my word on that. Trust me, it's pretty awesome. Now, look at the next 4 real quick. NBP FSSBM hybrid. What does that mean? NBP, frequency separation, surface blur, median, hybrid. Okay, let's run that real quick. So the first thing that happens is it's going to run surface blur. You look at that and you decide what you want to do. And it's on a smart filter as well, so then you can run median after that. And you can get kind of the best of both worlds. And then it does the separation there. Here again, another small detail that you think, why would I ever care? Well, when you start analyzing how the texture is preserved and what it is you can and cannot do, not just on different radii, but the different ways you do the smoothing operator, you might start going, you know what, I like this hybrid thing. And your hybrid might end up where you use a very small radius for surface blur, and then maybe a very high radius, maybe not that high, and then a very high radius for median, and now you're getting the looks that you wanted. Or the opposite's true. So you come back in here, and let's say you want to run a higher radius, and a higher radius in general, higher threshold on surface blur, and then a smaller one, maybe like a 3 of median. Maybe discover that's your sweet spot. And then it does its separation process, and then you run with it. See, again, hard to show you the differences here on the video. You really need to play with this to find out. But it just gives you those choices so you can decide what's more important to you. Do you want to be able to control a lot of high texture in different luminosity ranges? Do you want to be able to worry about your perimeters? Do you want to catch all? Do you want little details for specific things? I need to fix that cheek, so I use one thing. Now, just to show you, we also have the exact same hybrid process, but it also selects just the subject. I'm just going to run through it so you can see. Okay, and boom, now we have it set up with the subject masked out on top like before. Okay, so I'm just showing that real quick. Now, let's talk about these last two ancillary ones, okay? First and foremost, I'm going to go out of order. We have solarization. If you do any type of frequency separation, then you know what solarization is. Rather, if you've done it for a little while, you've seen it. It's a visualization layer. So we'll run median to show you, like normal. If you haven't done solarization before, I'll show you what it's for. So you go to the top, the top healing layer, and then you run solarization. Now, the first you get a crazy rainbow result, but you hold down Option or Alt, and you unclip the healing layer, and now you see the healing layer very, very clearly. You can do this other ways, but this is the easiest way. If you turn off solarization, then you see that the healing layer is a little harder to see. Okay, solarization kind of amplifies all the textures and everything, so you can work on it. So while you're on that layer, you can go to your, let's say I'm on spot healing right now. And while you're spot healing, I know you guys can barely see this, make sure it's on not sample all layers. And you can come in here and just work specific textures, whether you're trying to work about a certain hair or something like that. You can do all kinds of things. This is a visualization layer in case you're curious about what the texture pattern is doing and you want to go in and modify certain things. It's a little more advanced in that it's not clear what the benefit is until you start using it a lot. But you're going to be using it a lot by, clipping it off and clipping it back on and turning off solarization. And you can work on it while it's clipped with solarization off like normal, but you can of course also unclip it, or rather, unclip it and turn on solarization, and you can see what you're doing a little bit better, and you can use any type of healing tool that you want on here. Okay, so that's pretty normal. We include it because, hey, it's frequency separation. You should have this function. It's very, very important that you have it. All right, now that's cute and all, and I love it, and it's very common. But what is our add con clipped? In other words, contrast clipped. Well, let's talk about that. Let's come over here to this arm, okay? Let's run median subject real quick. Okay, so we're gonna run like a 13, I guess, I don't know, let it finish. Now, let's say you're doing some heavy painting. You're here on transitions. You can do multiple layers of transitions. But let's say you come in here and you want to sample color and paint. I got like a 4% flow. I'm going to try to replicate the shadows under there. And I'm going to paint pretty darn heavily on here. And I know I painted over a jacket. At least the arm perimeter is protected by the mask that's already been created. But I know I painted over the jacket, and that's understandable. Okay, something like that. And let's say I like what's happening on and off. You can see I've lost a lot of detail, or rather contrast. So what I do is I'm going to quickly fix the jacket mask. It's pretty common when you're doing this kind of heavy frequency separation methodology. Okay, there we go. Now, we turn this on and off and we see that it has worked, but we've lost some contrast. This is very common when you're going through the process, especially with a lot of skin. You have an arm, an entire leg, a piece of a leg, a forehead, a hand, elbow, whatever. You're painting and it works. But one of the byproducts of painting that heavily is great for texture, great for that glamour look. But one of the byproducts is that you lose contrast. So what happens is on that layer, you just simply hit NBP add con clipped, boom. And it automatically adds a layer of levels. It already starts with a little bit of a contrast boost. You can see off, on, it's kind of hard to see. Let's zoom in. Off, on, it starts with a very slight contrast boost, and you can increase that, okay? So here I am increasing the contrast, brighter and darker, something like that. So I went from that to that. If I turn off the layer completely, it went from that to that. And I can keep refining it, don't get me wrong, keep refining my mask until I get it like I want. So between opacity, let's put it at 70, and this contrast booster on top, I can paint freely and happily and bring back contrast that I may be missing because it's just a byproduct of that process. Now, I talk about this again in my tutorial videos over the years on it's great to paint entire body parts like this, and then you can control specifically body part by body part on all the different layers, because keep in mind, you can make as many layers in between as you want. Okay, and if you're here and need to add more contrast, just go boom and add contrast, right? It's already clipped down for you, so you're not adding contrast to the entire image. Again, just another option. Guys, I just want to show you all of this because when it comes to frequency separation, there are so many different ways to go about doing it. I thought, I don't know that I've ever seen a collection of frequency separation actions that gives you this many options, so you can use exactly what you want, where you want, and how you want. I know for me over the years, I have a couple of different, hodgepodge frequency separation actions that I've put together for different purposes. I have some that are just for healing. I have some that are median, and some that are surface blur. Yeah, I have a Gaussian one sitting around. And I do all these processes, or I did, manually to mask out the subject and things like that. You get used to a process and you keep doing it. And I was like, hold up a second. Let me put all these thoughts together into a collection that make more sense for me. And I was like, well, you know what? I think this collection could be useful, especially with a video that explains it. This one's a little bit long, but it does go over everything. And I hope it does help you. I hope you don't give up on frequency separation and you don't see it as some kind of, I don't know, it has a bad reputation. And the reason why is that, like so many functions, it can be used the wrong way. But when used the right way, frequency separation has a lot of functions for lots of different things. If you're new to it and you learned it first about smoothing skin, that's how you first thought you should use it for, partially wrong, because smoothing is the wrong word, but that's usually what people kind of learn about frequency separation for the first time on YouTube. But there's so much more to it. It's not just skin. Once you start really getting more advanced, if you choose to, you can start really making a lot of things dance in Photoshop when it comes to separating frequencies.